Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the latest edition of Web of Wyrd, episode number 27. Now, it's been really quite a while since myself and the brother Pete have been able to put out a podcast, and I say that in that way deliberately because we did try a number of times, but even actually connecting has been pretty challenging during the last couple of months. And having spoken to lots of people on the Quantum Plant Healing website and doing a few live calls and stuff, it's very apparent that we're not the only ones that have been experiencing the need to retreat somewhat from the world and deal with our own personal spaces. So, hey, bro, it's good to be chatting with you again. How are you doing?
Wow, it's been a long time, Jude. I'm doing good actually. I mean, I wouldn't have said that about a month ago,
Right.
but I mean, it's all good. I mean, I feel that you mentioned retreating. It's like hibernation for me, and I think this is really timely that we're doing this now at Imolc, and we're going to be talking about snowdrop and new beginnings and things like that. And I do feel this is a new beginning, and I feel like I'm coming out of something now, but it's been a long dark haul for sure.
Right, and of course that is what winter is about, really. And some of our favorite medicines, that come out in the September-October period, really encourage us, right, to go inwards and use the dark, cold winter months, particularly December and January, which I think in Europe, particularly Northern Europe, have been very cold and very dark over the last few weeks. But the emphasis is to go inwards, and sometimes when you do have a more public persona, either as a YouTube channeler or as a teacher, working at the school like you do, we don't always have the option to necessarily retreat as fully as we would like. And certainly from my own perspective, trying to balance the internal and the external has been quite challenging. And as I quoted on the piece I did with Shirley and Sandy the other day, one of my favorite movies is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and there's a period where the guy that's playing is Hunter S. Thompson, goes into what Benicio del Toro describes as the hellishly introspective phase of his journey, which I think is weirdly after he's consumed some very strong substances. So I feel like I've been in that hellishly introspective phase during January, but like you say, it's all good. Everything is always good, and we're going to be talking about our good old friend Dandelion as well as Snowdrop later, because today is full moon in Leo, and Dandelion is very connected to Leo, as we know. But what would you like to start with today, bro? I know we've got a bunch of things that we've been mulling on, and we want to talk about the process of Imog, but what's catching your attention you'd like to flag first?
Well, I guess what's coming to me is that as I go out and about, I mean, it's strange because I say I've been hibernating, but I haven't, because I've not been able to. I've had to go to work. I've had to
Right.
meet people. I did have a couple of weeks in over the sort of Yuletide where we did close down pretty much completely, and actually wasn't feeling very well, so I stayed in bed a lot of it, which was fantastic actually.
Right.
Um, but going out and about, and I'm finding this a lot now, and I'm noticing a rather high level of what I might call sort of dysfunctionality
Right.
in a lot of the people that I'm meeting. I don't know whether they're going through a similar thing to me, and they're all just sort of bewildered and bemused, a bit like I feel myself. But my perception is that there's a lot of people who are kind of have sort of switched themselves off somehow, because
Mm.
I'm finding that I'm getting a lot of blank looks. I think I mentioned just before we came on that I've been doing a little bit of traveling, just locally, really. Well, I say locally within Europe. We went to Ireland to teach in October, and we went to this weird place. It was like it was like a hotel, but there didn't seem to be anybody in charge. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't that usually
Yeah.
in a hotel you have a reception,
Mhm.
and you have a staff.
Yep.
And we went in, there was no staff, no reception, nothing. There was a bar with a sort of, somewhat dazed looking person behind it. And then
Right.
eventually somebody rocked up and brought a little plinth with them and put it down and said, right, who are you? And, oh, and looked at our booking and said, well, you're not, actually, we don't have a room for you. And I said, what do you mean you don't have a room? I've got a booking. And she said, oh, well, it's not ready yet. And it took them about an hour to get the room ready. This was at 7 o'clock in the evening,
Right. Huh.
and we eventually got the room. But it was sort of everybody we spoke to just was not really listening, was
Mhm.
not really understanding what was going on, was not, I'm used to people in hospitality being all over you. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
really being attentive and, almost too much in a way. And these people were just, they were like, what are you doing here? And we went to Barcelona just recently, and I felt the same, particularly in the airports.
Yeah, yeah,
It was just like sort of being in a sort of a throng of slightly odd human
yeah.
beings, and I didn't quite understand where they were coming from or what they were doing. I don't have that feeling about most people, the people I know and I meet at work
Yeah.
and I sort of get on with and stuff. But it was just out in the public spaces. It's almost like people are dazed by something, and I don't know whether any, maybe I'm just maybe this is just completely subjective. I don't know whether other people have noticed that. It'd be interesting to get some feedback on that.
Well, for sure, yeah. For our listeners out there, as always, we love feedback either directly to me and Pete via email or comments in the YouTube box. And yeah, I can completely can concur with what you've just said there, bro. I've been to quite a few hotels in Mexico over the last 6 or 7 months for various amounts of traveling, and had exactly the same experience of virtually all of them. A sense of like skeleton staff working in big 4-5 star hotels, often with 20-30% of the hotel not even functioning, bars shut down. Restaurants closed, but sort of barely being able to stay open, which has also given rise to me anyway of wondering how some of these businesses are staying open. Clearly not being able to function properly, but at the same time, the staff that are there being somewhat dazed, confused, not really sure. And I've come to sort of name it as the Sims world. I've often felt like I've been surrounded by Sims, or somehow people simulating life and sort of rocking up to work, going through the motions, but not really interacting with each other, not interacting even with the computer systems. So many people I've encountered have not been able to use the systems in front of them, which clearly they've been trained on and probably worked on for years. And it's amazing how often the computer systems break down and they're not able to process a booking, even though they're a hotel or a restaurant or whatever. And kind of finding increasingly that my navigating through the outdoor world outside of the confines of my own home is becoming more and more surreal. And we talked about this too. It's on one level detaching myself from that, but also needing to navigate it. And going to the supermarket is often quite a strange experience, often quite heavy. Certainly nearly always need to do some sort of cleansing work on myself the moment I come home from an excursion out. But one thing I often say to people is, have you noticed this? And people say no. And I say, well, have you actually stopped for 10 minutes and actually watched what's going on around you? People are, no, I'm too busy. Which is why I feel that this phenomenon that me and you are spotting, and I'm sure many of our listeners too, is perhaps not so much in the collective awareness, maybe because a large part of the collective is in the sort of sim state. But also, and this is where I love our friend Dandelion, who we're going to be talking about today, is he brings us into the present moment and says, hey, just watch what's going on around you for 10 minutes and you might be surprised by what you see or what you don't see. And I feel like that, being Scorpio, people watching is something that's kind of innate. But I'm very observant of what goes on in the world around me because I take my cues from my immediate terrain as a sort of a micro and macro, what might be going on at the bigger collective terrain. So, I agree. I feel dysfunctionality on many levels is now inherent. And, we can start to see this on the bigger picture. And, this is something else we wanted to talk about with some of the infrastructure. And particularly in Britain, you're going through a series of major strikes. We were in Texas last week, and even though it didn't snow, it wasn't frozen, they had to shut all of the schools down. They had to shut banks down because they couldn't deal with the weather conditions. I'm like, this is one of the preeminent civilized countries in the world, and they can't deal with near freezing conditions. I'm just like, how come other parts of the world that are somewhat less developed apparently deal with this easily every year? And it kind of shocked me is, that this sort of great bastion of the world, the free world, the democratic world, the developed world is not able to handle even just a little bit of frost without the whole thing grinding to a halt.
But David, you come from the UK. That's normal. Right. Yeah, 2 degrees of frost and everything shuts down. Then
if the temperature goes over 25 degrees, apparently no railway lines can take that, and they buckle and walk.
Buckle.
There are many hot countries that have railway lines that seem to manage this. So what is going on here? And obviously we always have to be a little careful on the web of Wyrd because we get a little excited. But I feel like we're now witnessing the very sort of strong effect of Neptune in Pisces. The sort of, are we looking at life through a watery filter that's somewhat real, but also somewhat surreal?
I think that's a really good point, actually, and the sort of wateriness of it, I think, is the other, because the other thing I've observed is that, particularly in my work and consulting people with the people who come to me for help, is that there's a kind of a mixture of the sort of autopilot syndrome that I think we've just been
Right.
talking about, plus a hefty degree of really frenetic, emotionally charged panic, um, as though they kind of inherently know that there's something deeply wrong, but they don't know what to do about it and they can't handle it.
Mm.
So I've had a
Right.
lot of clients actually who sort of consulting me, and they're just, verbally they're going 19 to the dozen. They're going at 100 miles an hour. I can see them ramping up the sort of speed of their mental interactions, as though they think that if they keep it running fast, keep the engine, if you like, turning over fast enough, revving fast enough, that'll sort of get them out of whatever it is they think they're in. And it's a really interesting phenomenon, because I just sit there and I try to, I have this practice where I find that, you try and find a point of resonance between you and the person that you're working
Yeah.
with,
Yeah.
so that you kind of breathe, and you hope that maybe by breathing, their breathing will start to sync with yours, and you'll pay attention to your own grounding, and you'll really try. But I've been finding it really difficult sitting in front of some of these people to keep myself grounded. Do you know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah.
I'm watching them sort of take off, almost like sort of, um, and it kind of, if you spend enough time, then usually you can come to a moment where, okay, they kind of got the need to just be a little bit measured, a little bit more measured about something. And I very much function in my work by getting people to do very, very practical things to help themselves, whether it be just taking a little bit of time here and there to making some herbal preparations, that really, really practical stuff that they insert into their lives to try to break these frenetic patterns that they're all
Right.
stuck in.
Mm.
And it's just been, I mean, it can be difficult anyway. I mean, we call it compliance in our business.
Yeah.
Will people do what you ask them to do? But I'm finding that very, very challenging at the moment, and I have the impression that people are sort of going out of those sessions and just kind of, just basically switching back straight into
Yeah.
manic mode again.
Wow.
But I mean, that aside, I also find that there's also a level at which I'm in much, much more demand than I ever have been as well.
Mhm.
That I'm almost overwhelmed by the number of people who are actually asking me for help at the moment, which again, you shouldn't complain. You're in business, that you're in demand. But it has been a case for me, I guess, of really wanting to sort of offset that whole thing by slowing my own life down. It's really interesting,
Yeah.
because I've been a really fast-paced person most of my life, and I
Mm.
find that changing a lot now. I'm finding myself just kind of really detaching a lot, and sort of going into my internal processes much more, which I think it's healthy.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm kind of wanting to see that whatever's going on, and the political situation and all the stuff that we've been talking about around that, which I'm sure we're going to get into, um, kind of wanting to sort of see that, get to that point where all of that starts to become, how can I put it, almost like a sideshow, something to be watched, observed, but not taken seriously.
It's definitely a show for sure, right? And you could call it a sideshow, or maybe even a freak show in some places, I think.
Yeah.
But it's interesting what you're saying. That I can say that the same is pretty much true for me. I've also been overwhelmed with requests for help, to the point that it was almost more than I could deal with, and also needing to retreat at some point from being able to offer my services as a healer, but also consistently seeing many of the same patterns coming up for people, huge levels of anxiety, in people. And of course, my more quantum psychic world, I often have a clear idea of what's causing people anxiety, and often it's coming from the non-physical realms. And again, I think some of the last couple of years and has been difficult for some of us to speak out about what we perceive is actually happening for people. But also what I'm seeing now is the deconstruction of the health paradigm that we've been forced to accept, I guess you can say, over the last few hundred years, and particularly the last few years. With the astrology the way that it is, and particularly with Saturn moving into Pisces soon, in early March, I think it's on March the 8th, we're being encouraged to look now at a different kind of structure, and also with the South Node in Scorpio, the poisonous medications of the past are now sort of coming up for their final, I think it's at 7 degrees South Node in Scorpio. So well, I feel like we're coming to the end of a sort of a whole phase around health and well-being, but also, you know, with today being full moon in Leo, Leo is very much about the sign of the heart and about sovereignty. And I think that one of the big pieces that, you know, I'm very much hoping to see in 2023 is this sense of self-sovereignty when it comes to health and well-being, but also the understanding that in order to be a well-being and sovereign doesn't mean that we go to somebody else to get help, is that we take care of ourselves. But in order to do that, we need to have a much better understanding of what's making us sick. And we have to, I think, in many cases, rip up the doctrines that have been sort of dished out through the more traditional Western medicine channels and start looking at things differently, which, of course, I know is something that we're both very much into. But also that frenetic pace, I think, is partly coming now from some of the planets going direct. Mercury, Mars and Uranus have all gone direct in the last couple of weeks. Yeah. Which again is going to give a very strong forwards impetus, and perhaps some of our own retreating and reflecting is down to that sort of more reviewing process that those planets in retro gave us over the last couple of months. And I think if I speak for myself, that process, even though it was uncomfortable, actually throughout most of December and January, was entirely necessary, because it brought up a bunch of stuff that was hidden from me. And I go into that on the Quantum Plant Upgrades on the website that we put out recently. And of course, a big part of that is our friend Dandelion, who we're going to be talking about later. But yeah, I feel like, you know, the need to retreat during these winter months, to go inwards and to reflect on where we're at and all, but also to take sort of a stock picture of what's going on for the people around us, because we you know, we don't live in isolation. Hopefully we're not living in a vacuum, and we do all have to share the wider collective space together. But at the same time, you know, in sharing that wider space, are we entering into a sort of an energetic toxic soup? That's certainly how I'm perceiving the world. And every time I go out, I have to come home and immediately do an energetic cleaning on myself, not because I'm a hypochondriac or paranoid, but if I don't, I start to feel out quite quickly. And that makes me think about the clients that you're meeting, is that, yeah, if I was to not do that work on myself on a daily basis, I think I'd probably be like the people coming to see you, sort of wired into some sort of space that's full of anxiety and worry. So how do you see this developing, bro, in the next little period? I mean, well, this is obviously part of a collective process, right?
Absolutely, and there's so much to loop back to in what you just said as well. One of the things that occurs to me is that, you know, you've talked about almost like a paradigm shift in the way that we handle health care. And I've been on this track for a long time. I reckon, you know, I've been doing it for about 30 years now. When I first met the guy who introduced me to what I immediately took to be a new paradigm based on plants, actually, I was super excited, and I thought, this is the medicine of the future. And then I watched everything sort of get almost like consolidated into the old pattern again. It was almost like my future was not gelling with the future that everybody else seemed to want. But I do feel that recent events have signaled a sort of I'm reminded of, I don't know whether you or any of our listeners know anything about the sort of science of, the philosophy of science, or the theory of science, but there's a couple of guys out there who are sort of fairly kind of well known for putting, I would say complementary, but some people see them opposite views of what science actually is. And one of them is dear old Karl Popper and his theory of falsifiability, which I think is very poorly understood, which is whereby, you know, a thing can be held true up to a certain point, and that point being where somebody comes along and proves that it's not true. And the other one is a guy called Thomas Kuhn, who wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which was, you know, when a paradigm is close to the end, when it's falling apart, when everybody knows that it can't hold together anymore, one of the things that is known to happen is that the proponents of the old paradigm hold on for dear life, reinforce it to the point of fascism, until finally it can't be maintained anymore. And I think that's where we are with health at the moment. And it's being reflected really heavily in the UK, particularly by the utter, complete and, you know, merciless destruction of the National Health Service, which,
Mhm.
you know, a lot of people are actually clinging to as well. I mean, it's an interesting one because for many, many years, I think people have sort of been dissing off the National Health Service and saying, oh, you know, either because they don't get what they need or the medicine doesn't work or because there's not enough capacity, there's not enough resources. And now that it has actually been pretty much dismantled. And when you hear, by the way, if you live in the UK, you'll have heard these pronouncements from politicians. Oh, no, 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 we're not dismantling the National Health. We love the National Health. We're putting resources in. Look at all the money we put into the National Health Service, blah, blah, blah. As soon as you hear that, you know that they are selling it off, and they have sold it off, and most of it now is in private hands, and people are not able. It's now
Yeah.
sort of 2 or 3 weeks to get an appointment with a doctor. And this whole thing about sovereignty in health is super important in this context. And this is what me, and I am actually the chair of an organization called the General Naturopathic Council. And what we are involved in is trying to promote something else, trying to promote other ideas. There's a super opportunity coming up very, very shortly. I'm not able to say very much about it, but it is basically going to be an online resource, and it's conducted along the lines of something they're calling ecological medicine. So there are sort of, you know, a dozen or so domains wherein we meet experiences that impact on our health, and they are, you know, as one doctor actually said, I think I can't remember the name of the guy now, but he wrote a book about the politics of medicine, and he said most symptoms, most diseases, most pathologies that people suffer from are not medical problems. They are social problems, financial problems, political problems, environmental problems, etc., etc. And if you look at all these domains in your life, the social, the political, the financial, the workspace, the relationships, etc. If you look at all of that and think, you know, do an assessment of that, and you instantly know what's making you sick. Many of my patients, if you actually get them to sit down for long enough and breathe and sort of think about their lives, and you talk to them honestly and openly about what's going on, many of them know exactly why they're not feeling very well. And as soon as they
Right.
know that, you can then open up the possibility of, well, this is what you do about it. You know, it's not, no
Right.
doctor can do that for you. No doctor is going to solve this for you. You've got to
Right.
solve it. But you know, we're here to hold your hand, so to speak. We're here to support you and to encourage you in the process. And that's more of the work that I've been doing. Yes, I work with plants, and I work with, you know, getting people not to eat complete crap in their diets, but mostly these days I hold their hands and I say, look, it's actually going to be okay.
Right. You know, and we've talked about this before, and you know, I'm going to loop back to a phrase from our old buddy Paul Strode, who I used to do Web of Wyrd with a long time ago, and he talked about the inner physician, and you know, I love that idea. That really and truly, the process you've just described is also the one that I try to engage with my clients as well, which is to get them to talk about the process and get them to identify how these things happen. And of course, that normally comes through consultations and so on. But it's like, you know, somehow we already know what's wrong with us, but we've lost that ability to think for ourselves. And again, maybe this is some of the dysfunctionality we're seeing, and so we've outsourced. I remember Philip Cargon, the former head of the Ovate and Druid organization, OBOD, and he used to talk about this outsourcing. Maybe you even at that talk back at Shamanic Lands, outsourcing everything, outsourcing our ability to read maps with sat nav, outsourcing our ability to be our own physician to the NHS or to medication or to whatever. And the truth is that, and I truly believe this, is that nobody knows your health better than you. But somehow we've been convinced that that's not true, that somebody else knows better than us and we should believe them. And, you know, through a simple process, I think, of inner reflection and a little bit of guidance with people like yourself, people can quickly realize, oh, I think it's actually this that's wrong with me. Good, let's work with that. Let's work with your innate intuition about yourself, rather than give you a blanket medication that apparently does this, this, and this. And, you know, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But, you know, this idea of ecological medicine and sovereignty, and I think is interesting today, again, you know, full moon in Leo, it's about the sovereignty of the heart, but it's also, this full moon is at the 16th degree of Leo, and the 16th card in the tarot is the Tower card. All the people talking about this at the moment because of the Tower's energy of collapse. And I feel like over the next couple of months, we are going to see a collapsing of the old paradigm. And again, I referred to the beautiful book that Barbara Griggs wrote about the new green pharmacy, and she shows very clearly the two different tracks of health that have been given to us over the last 2,000 years, dating back to the time of the Romans, and how those pathways have separated. And one is the more natural green pharmacy that we can work with ourselves in co-creation and co-communication with the plants, or there's the other one, which is something where we go and get given something by somebody who believes they know more about us than we know about ourselves, and that's not sovereign. And so I'm thinking maybe this kind of changing of energy with Imbolc being at the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox is showing us that maybe now we can dare to dream. And again, we're going to be talking about Snowdrop, a dreaming plant, about a new beginning and a birthing of a new way of looking at our own sovereignty when it comes to our own well-being, which I think is something that I've long wanted, and I guess you too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm reminded of the words of my teacher, or one of my teachers from a long, long time ago now, Dr. Richard Schultz. And I remember saying, one of the purposes of all this stuff I'm teaching is so you can go out and teach it to other people, and they can, take on the methods of self-managed healthcare. One of the core principles of naturopathy is that we're teachers. We don't just do something to people to make them better, that the healing comes from within. This is a core principle of what we do, the vis medicatrix naturae, the healing power of nature that's in us all, and all we have to do is activate it. And we've forgotten, most of us, we've forgotten how to do that. And he very famously said, look, my aim is for everybody to be able to look after their own health according to natural principles, and then we can all go down to the beach and party. It's right. That we're all stuck in this horrible track of, oh my God, we've got to do this, we've got to solve all these problems, but we forget to party. We forget to have fun. We forget that life is about enjoyment. And I'm thinking of dandelion when I say that as well. That's bright, kind of cheerful optimism that you get from that plant, I think, is one of the main, I know we're going to be talking about danders. But that's very much been a part of my sort of mindset at the moment, has been trying to keep that cheerfulness going despite all the sort of mayhem and the darkness. And I think that even in terms of scientific medicine these days, we have this concept of psychoneuroimmunology. I don't know whether you've heard of it. It's getting very erudite, this, but it's basically the concept that what you think either makes you well or makes you sick. Your emotions either make you well or make you sick. If you are indulging in the lower emotions, in the lower astral stuff, then you're going to be sick. If you go up to the higher levels and you engage with the emotions of joy and love and positivity, then of course you get a very different result. And that's a part of the battle as well, is keeping people on the up. Yeah,
I totally agree. And of course, you're making me think about so many people I know who've got stuck in, let's call it the system, the Western medical system, who just progressively never seem to get better. And it's like, because there's some part of that system that encourages you to continue to feel sick. And so that's where the victim mentality starts to come in. And I've met so many people over the years who profess with the words that I want to get better, but actually every action they have is doing the opposite. And it's reinforcing the fact that they're sick. And it's like, well, do you really want to get better, or do you really want to stay sick? And it's like, well, if I get better, then I don't get all of the attention and the sympathy that I've been getting, which is, I understand that. And I've met many people like that who clearly needed love, but they were staying in a place of sickness because they perceived that was the only way that they were going to get any attention from anybody, which of course is reinforced by the medication that keeps you in that space. Whereas I guess the philosophy that we're looking at, and again, you've worked with us at QPH and all of the emotions that we've been doing, is that we're trying to educate people. It's like, okay, we don't want to be your teachers, we don't want to be your gurus or your medical professionals. Yes, we can help you, but ultimately what we really want is for you to be able to do this yourself. And the plants, I really believe, are the bridge right now to that place of complete inner physician ability that we can do from our higher selves in any given moment, but we're still learning or remembering how to do that. And the plants, I really feel like we talked about elder, these beings are they're some of the most powerful beings I've ever worked with, ever encountered, and they're here to assist us to show that at a quantum intelligence level we can fix almost anything very, very quickly if we want to, and if we don't, then well, we won't. And I think that's a really important piece that I think probably me and you're going to continue to hammer for a while. It's like, it's a choice. So. Do you want to be well, or do you want to be unwell? Do you want to be sovereign, or do you want to be codependent? And ultimately, if you want to be codependent, it's going to be difficult for you to find your way into the in a new earth that many of us are already experiencing, because if you're in a codependent space, yeah. Come on, bro.
Yeah, yeah, and I liked what you said earlier before we went online, actually, about you know, the new earth being inside us, and we have to make it by changing our minds, by changing our emotions. And I think this is the big sort of transformation that we're being asked to make within ourselves at the moment. And also, I think it occurred to me as you were talking that this is a moment of opportunity. Many people see it as a very, very dark moment. Many people see it as you know, problems and strikes and food shortages and you know, what dare I say it, pandemics and all the rest of it. But actually, it's a moment of opportunity, and I also get the sense that the veil, if you like, that, you know, the veil between this world and what lies beyond, and this world being part of a spectrum, like the electromagnetic spectrum. You know, we see the light, but the light is just a very, very small slither within that spectrum, and reality is a bit like that too. And we've been blinkered into seeing just what's in front of us. And I think that one of the things that's confusing people is that's starting to break down now. I think the energies that have been directed at the planet, you know, you talk about it from an astrological point of view, and we could talk about it from a kind of a, you know, a metaphysical and sort of esoteric point of view. I believe there are beings out there, including the plant beings, who are actually really rooting for us at the moment, but they're having to break down this rigid conception of reality that we've got. And as it breaks down, I think people are becoming confused and maybe scared too, because it's, you know, it's releasing things that they didn't expect to see or have to deal with. But it's all good.
It is all good, and I love what you just said there from a couple of perspectives. So, you know, first of all, people like us who've been working with plant medicines and perhaps more au fait and adept with alternative realities and levels of consciousness, perhaps it's not such a scary prospect. And we've been, I guess you could say, you know, walking through the veil and the mist for some time and seeing what's beyond the physical realm. And so the bardo world or the astral realms, they're not so unfamiliar to us. But I would say that that's probably not true for the vast majority of the world's population. And the sudden sort of ascent into a more, how to say, veilless space, and this is where, you know, plants like wormwood are really good at helping us to remove the veil, is a scary experience for people. And, you know, I think what's really, you know, seeing that manifest in the 3D is seeing what's going on with the disclosures with many politicians. I mean, you know, we were just joking about our dear old friend, Mr. Hancock, being taken to task by Richard Madeley on TV recently about what he did with the money that he received from I'm a Celebrity, I think it was, where he said he was going to give it all to charity. And I don't think we're getting into trouble for this one because it was on daytime TV. And Richard very politely numerous times asked Mr. Hancock, well, how come if it was for charity, you kept 320 out of 330 grand and only gave 10 of it to charity? At which point Mr. Hancock squirmed a lot. And of course, our own Prime Minister also has links to companies that have been heavily involved in the rollout of certain medications over the last 3 years, all of which is on public record. So I feel like we're reasonably safe. And of course, Mr. Johnson, our good old friend, Mr. Johnson, who is perpetually up to his eyeballs in shit. It seems it doesn't matter which way he turns, he seems to bring some sort of pomp and bluster. And another one of the major characters in the piece over the last few couple of years has been the now disgraced former, I think, finance minister, and previously to that, minister, I think, of medications or something, who also seemingly has lots of vested interests in things which, as a politician, he probably shouldn't have at a financial level. So I feel like the veil of the veneer of the government is here to help us. They're our friends. The veneer of politicians and pop stars is being removed. Many now are being exposed for their links through certain unpleasant practices of people moving out of Africa. Certainly Madonna has been in the news recently about that, as indeed have many other famous stars. And I feel like the veneer of Hollywood and all that shines on TV is now being ruthlessly exposed for the very unpleasant freak show that it really is. And that's uncomfortable for people, because when you remove the you know, the anchors of TV, the news, the government, these people that we've lived and grown up with, the people that we see on the TV every day, and realizing that many of them are not quite who we thought they were, and perhaps even worse. And of course, you know, even some of the crazy stuff that's been going on in the US recently, the clown show with the balloons. I think is a very funny piece, and I know you've not been following that one quite so much, but all of these pieces, just very briefly on that one, a so-called Chinese spy balloon has somehow drifted over the US, and apparently now there's one over Colombia too. And the question is, well, how did something that's apparently from a country that the US is not on great terms with seem to just drift aimlessly across American airspace for several days, potentially spying on the American population? How is that allowed to happen? And of course, all fingers are now pointing to our good old friend Uncle Joe, who hasn't been shaking hands with invisible people recently, but has continually given a lot of mirth to those people who've been watching him. And again, what I'm trying to point towards here is just the farcical nature of what is being unfolded on the TV. And I thought to myself just a few days ago, I was just like, imagine if we'd seen all this stuff 5 years ago. It would have been, headline screaming news, all of it. And yet we've all got so sort of anesthetized or switched off, or it's just like, we're seeing it for the show that it is, that it's not really causing any kind of uproar, at least not yet. And I'm wondering now, with the veil being removed more fully, whether we're going to start to see the effects of people going, oh my gosh, like what the hell just happened here, to many of us, and why did this happen, and why did we let it happen? And I feel that those clients with the anxiety issues and maybe even anger issues are going to increase in the coming weeks and months. And just wondering if you have anything to say around any of that, bro.
Yeah. I mean, I've got this sort of film, if you like, this feature film going on in front of my mind as in my virtual vision as you talk, and it's like Apocalypse When, I guess, would be a good title for it, because we've all been looking at these things and these effects and thinking, surely it can't last, and it does, and it goes on and it goes on, and these people seem to, Sunak and his crew and Johnson, they're still all around. But how do they survive Biden? How on earth? Why isn't he dropped off the edge by now? He's plainly completely ineffectual. Is it, and then the phrase comes to me: is it in fact all conspiracy, or is it in fact a gigantic cock up? Or maybe it's a predetermined, i.e. conspiracy up to a point, but it's predetermined in the sense that, maybe, guys, if we make such a really horrible pig's ear of this, these people will wake up and start realizing that they've got to do it themselves. And that, I think it's kind of, I prefer to take it on that level in a way. I prefer to take it that, behind the veil, so to speak, the string pulling, which, by the way, I actually think is being done by ourselves in a cooperative venture to wake ourselves up. The string pulling is kind of, it's been sort of planned for a long time. It's like, I've got to do this now. I've got to make a complete pig's ear of being prime minister. I've got to do some really terrible stuff, because if I don't, then people are not going to realize that I'm a complete idiot, and they ought not trust me. And
sorry, go on, bro.
No, you go.
Well, you just reminded me of something that I heard just the other day, which was about a couple of the Simpsons shows, where I think in 2 different episodes, are sort of the final pieces of I guess you could say, the Armageddon that is being portrayed. There's one where I think the president comes on stage and pulls off his head, and it's reveals that it's actually a mask, and underneath he's a reptile. And then I think in another version where they do that again, the mask is pulled off the head, and underneath is an actor. And the Simpsons, however you want to think about the Simpsons, it's a show that I have generally loved, but I do also see that it's quite intricately linked to a lot of what's been played out over the last years. Is often a way of revealing ahead of time, like what's going to happen, whether it's Mr. Trump being elected as president, all of which nobody would have believed when the show came out. And I'm wondering, like, are we going to have some kind of crazy piece, at the end of all of this, where good old Uncle Joe, in the middle of shaking the hand with somebody who's not there, does pull off the mask and says, aha, gotcha. Or maybe, maybe we're going to see one of the royal family do something similar, and lo and behold, there may be some sort of cold-blooded animal underneath. Who knows? So it's also interesting to see the veneer or the veil of the monarchy slipping across Europe, right? And to see the British royal family literally imploding itself, maybe is distressing for some people. I suspect not me and you. But it's kind of, the structures crumbling, and this is, where the astrology gets super interesting, with Pluto entering into the anaretic 29th degree of Capricorn in the coming weeks, is kind of like the final moments of the top-down hierarchy, the elites, the matrix, and the shadow of all of that finally coming into full exposure. And as Jupiter has already moved into Aries and Saturn is about to move into Pisces, it feels like the big guys are going, okay, like now we're going to move into a different space. But in order to do that, we have to bring out the tarot tower card and say, okay, here's the collapse, and you're going to have to watch the collapse within yourself and perhaps in the world around you, but it's all okay, because if as you said, we are the ancestors that we've been waiting for. This is the shit show that we created for ourselves to participate in and watch simultaneously, and hopefully learn something from. And if we don't, well, another 25,000 years around the sun is maybe not that long. Some of us have been doing it for a while, I think. And so as always, I think it's good to take a slightly wry and sardonic look at what is going on and see it for the game show that it really is. And increasingly I do feel like I'm living in some sort of version of The Sims or The Simpsons.
The Sims or The Simpsons. Actually, when you were talking about Sims earlier, I had this vision of a lot of people wandering around like without their SIM card in, like the mobile phone without a SIM card. It's not much use,
Right? It's like a bunch of buttons that you can press, but nothing really happens.
Nothing will happen. There's no connection taking place. No.
Like your hotel in Ireland, by the sound of it. You're
punching
in all kinds of numbers, but nothing positive was coming back.
I know. Oh God, I could go about that. I did a Facebook rant on that one actually, which was quite well received. I was trying to look for it just now, but I couldn't find it. But I think all you can do is to laugh. And if you don't laugh, then you kind of, what's the alternative? You kind of get admired in this sort of bog of Neptunian, I guess, or Piscean dampness. And I think Neptune and Pisces have a lot going for them. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but there is that.
I'm a big fan of Pisces being Pisces rising. Yeah. I mean, just want to, on a couple of points there, the wonderful Pam Gregory, as always, is on point with many things. And what was I just going to say? So she alluded to a couple of interesting things, which I just want to bring into this piece before we move on, which is that the internet is having its Saturn return. It went live in 1994, 29 years ago. And she, in her most recent piece, alludes to the idea that she thinks there's going to be many new internets. So I just want to throw that one into the piece. And also, again, just reiterating that the new Earth is created inside of us first. And, are we sort of getting lost in the watery depths of the illusion and choosing the frequency of fear? And this is the other thing she said really beautifully again. It's like we have two options now. We choose the frequency of love, or we choose the frequency of fear. I would dare to suggest the frequency of love is the frequency of the new Earth, and the frequency of fear is the one of the old paradigm. Just wanted to bring these final few pieces in before we get into the plant. So what do you think about that piece about the internet? What's your take on that? Because I think that's kind of very interesting as as Pluto's about to leave Capricorn and go into Aquarius, which I think is very much about these kinds of things.
Yeah, it is an interesting one, the Saturn return. I mean, this is with me a lot. I was aware of the whole issue of the Saturn return when I went through my first one, and and it was heavy duty stuff, man. And Saturn in fact went retrograde in the middle of it all as well. So I had sort of 3 transits. And you have to think of what does the Saturn return actually signify. I love that book by Liz Green. Do you know the one? It was called Saturn, and you look at an old devil.
Yes.
And that taught me, I read that during my Saturn return, actually. It taught me an awful lot about it. But there's something about the Saturn return which feels very, very familiar right now, and it is all linked into the internet, and it is, you're waiting for that change to come, and it doesn't come, and it doesn't come, and it doesn't come, and you just have to sort of quell your frustration and just be patient and wait it out, and then suddenly, without you even realizing it, it all resolves. That was my experience, and I think that it's quite possible that there is some change coming with the internet. And the idea of multiple internets, or a kind of proliferation or choice, even in kind of which internet, if you like, you want to join, like which universe do you want to be in, you know, which earth do you want to be on, which internet do you want? I think it's a really attractive idea, because I think that, I mean, there are all sorts of things about the internet. I mean, we only scratch the surface of those of us who use the internet in the way that you, and perhaps about you actually, but I do. I was made aware recently through contacts and issues around that there is this thing called the Mariana web, the dark web, and it's about 90% of what goes on that's not seen, and a lot of that contains all the sort of rubbish and horror, the pedophilia, you know, the dark dealings that the conspiracy theorists love to bring forward. And that's always going to be that just reminds me that there is a kind of the dark recesses, if you like, of the human mind. The internet is a human creation. It's a human production. It's got to mirror our minds, and as we change our minds, the internet has got to change. And if not everybody does change their minds, then there will be an internet for them, but there'll be one for us that reflects what's important for us, that reflects our mental preoccupations, our mental state, and our resonance with with the higher mind qualities, with the 5D qualities of love and joy, and all of those things that we've talked about. So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of excited by that idea of the Saturn return of the internet. I mean, Saturn returns, there's a lot of upheaval, there's a lot of frustration, but then there is change.
Well, of course, the other thing, about a lot of these technological advances, the internet really is just a mimic of the mycelial network, the Wyrd Wide Web, or the web of Wyrd, really.
Yeah.
And, I think back to 1994, and I think I was probably just starting my partying days back then as a young sort of teenager. And, I remember Pete Tong, the very famous BBC One radio DJ, talking about, Radio One and his show having an internet page. And I remember going to my, my university library a year or so later and trying to get onto a page, and, taking half an hour for literally one page to load, and just thinking, this is a load of cobblers, this is never going to take off. To then working a couple of years later on one of the very first exhibition shows. It was called Mobile Commerce World. And the big question at that point was, like, we've got this thing called the internet, but nobody knows how to make money out of it. And that was a major concern at that point, believe it or not. And then suddenly, like 29 years later, it's like it's such a fundamental part of our life that many people are addicted to it. Which I think is interesting. But this kind of idea of alternative internet, some of them could be quantum internet, some of them could be the metaverse, very definitely starting to see and even temporarily experience when I'm around certain people that they're hooked into another universe that is not one that I'm necessarily familiar with, but it's there, and I can see that they're accessing it. And that's a whole show for another time, I think. But it's in the end, how we view the internet is down to us. And I do really believe, off the back of what Zach had said to us, and having worked with the fungi for so long, that there are other types of information highways, let's call them that. And, those of us who are working more at a quantum 5D level with each other and communicating is really interesting. And I wouldn't say that I have lots of telepathic communications, but certainly I've checked myself on a number of occasions, and many other people too. And often it's just a fleeting kind of, oh, that feels like Pete sending me something, or that feels like one of my other friends, and it's just like, oh, I feel like I need to get in touch with them. And maybe we're only at the very beginnings of remembering how to do that. Maybe that's part of Dandelion's work with us, helping to rewire our DNA so that we're more receptive as antennae to incoming quantum messages from our friends and colleagues. So I'm very much intrigued to see how the idea of information highways, I'm going to call them that, I think, rather than the internet, are going to pan out. But talking of DNA and various other things, we're going to have a quick look at two plants now for the final 15 or 20 minutes of the show. And so the two that we are going to be looking at today are an old friend, Dandelion, because of the full moon in Leo. But first, I feel like we're going to have a little chat about Snowdrop. And what have you got to share around this one? I know we talked about it on the show I did with Shirley and Sandy, but we're going to add in a few more pieces to that right now, I think, Pete. Huh?
Yeah, just a little bit, really. I mean, what
Yeah,
you brought forward in your piece with Shelley and Sandy was the sort of pharmaceutical interest in snowdrop and the
yeah,
alkaloid galanthine, which has been found to be
yeah.
effective in treating dementia and particularly Alzheimer's. So that, in herbal medicine terms, would render it a nootropic, i.e., a herb that somehow addresses the mind, cognition,
Mm.
etc., which is very, very interesting. And because it's the first plant that comes out in the spring, it's known to sort of herald the spring, very often coming up through the snow even. That
Mhm.
sort of the idea of remembrance. Oh, we're waking up, we're remembering who we are, I think is very, very cogent and very sort of poignant for us when considering snowdrop. But the other thing I found out about it, and again, looping back to what you said, one of the girls said that you were talking to the other day, was that it is also an emmenagogue, so it promotes menstruation. And most plants that promote menstruation are also potentially, at least, parturients. And I think there was a lot in your piece the other day which was talking about new birth, and of course the birth of a new year, the
Mm.
coming out of the winter, and the whole sort of energy, the thrusting kind of fertility of spring just about to dawn upon us, strikes me as being very well served.
Mm.
Snowdrop sort of may appear, if you like, as the midwife in some way to all
Mhm.
of that as well. So I thought that was quite an interesting resonance there. But yeah, in herbal medicine, the only two uses I could find for it were the nootropic and the emmenagogue, or partus praeparator, which means preparation for birthing. I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, very much so. And a couple of things I just want to add into that. I mean, like you say, it's not a plant that's known hugely for medical uses, but the two that we've alluded to here, I think, are incredibly important. And again, if any of our audience haven't listened to the beautiful show I did Beyond the Flow with Shirley and Sandy the other day, it was it was a very fun piece to do, but also a lot of interesting intel came out of that. And it reminds me very much of another plant that's an emmenagogue, but also a dreaming plant, which is our dear old friend Lady Mugwort.
Mugwort, yes.
So yeah, but I just want to, this whole idea of birthing and this time of year, of course, it's lambing season, which is
Yeah.
something as native to Wales for many years, was something I'd often would be a joy to see at this time of year, as all of the baby lambs jumping around and everything else. But also this idea of the mind. And of course, one of the things I love about our conversations is you're always introducing me to very long herbalistic words. I have no idea what they mean, so or even how to spell them. So I have to go away and look at them afterwards. And so, but one of the audience, a lady called Wendy Felstead, put a comment on the show saying that as a person who's worked in care facilities, and particularly with the elderly, she's often been surprised and intrigued to notice that very, let's say, faculty smart elders have come into these kinds of facilities, and within 6 months have become either demented or with Alzheimer's. And from a starting place of seemingly being perfectly fine, suddenly within 6 months deteriorating into that space, which I think is an interesting piece. And maybe again another piece of the veil being removed is what actually goes on in these care homes. Maybe again some of the Western medicine that's given to people is promoting these problems. And in that particular talk, I talk about what I perceive as the Morgellons and how it's rewiring, maybe with a partially AI bent to it, the natural neural pathways of the brain. And of course, if you have two pathways trying to compete to deliver the the information into your awareness, it can get a little jumbled, I guess, and maybe even you're going to forget things at some point because you're not really sure what you're wired to. So maybe snowdrop is going to be a plant that's going to emerge, as part of the healing process to help with some of the side effects that we've begun to see from some of the medications offered over the last few years. And I think that, the dual aspect of clearing the mind and birthing at this particular time, again, Imbolc, it's very much about both of these energies. And, as we shift from the energy of winter solstice to spring equinox, which is when in the northern medicine world it goes to fire, I see at this midway point, the sort of the inner dreaming healing work that we've been doing doing since winter solstice is now coming to a different space. It's more about, well, how do my ideas that I've been having that are coming out of the release of the healing work I'm doing, how do I now start to birth them with more clarity as ideas into the physical space, which, you know, when the energy shifts at spring equinox with all of the other major astrology we've got going on around that, I think is a really exciting time. So I would really urge our audience out there, maybe connect to a snowdrop, make a flower essence, or maybe, you know, get into doing some dreaming practices, maybe with snowdrop, maybe with mugwort, and start to think about how you want to birth your dreams, which is really what I think snowdrop in many ways is showing us, but also its aspect of being in community. Is that how am I going to birth my dreams within a community that makes sense to me, that's with people that I resonate with? And, you know, one of the things I'm seeing very clearly now is a more of an aligning of tribes, whether it's through YouTube channels or whether it's through, you know, groups like our Quantum Plant Healing group, or I guess many other groups, about how are we finding each other, and again through the internet in many cases, or through high mind connections, how are we connecting with each other across the world and sharing ideas, often with people that we've never met before? And, you know, I often joke that Pam Gregory is the most wonderful lady I've never met. You know, but the connection has yielded so much. All of what we're doing here and with the QPH is all because of the connection that was made at an energetic and then through the internet level with that wonderful lady, and indeed many other people too. Zach, I've never met him because he's a 26th dimensional being, but somehow there's a connection. And so maybe we're being offered the opportunity now to dream big about how things are going to be different for us.
Yeah, and as just as you were talking that, I want to give a shout out actually to a couple of the people who've listened in and who have sought me out and actually come and seen me like in person. And I think that's incredible when you know, and I've had lots of people, for example, who I've, you know, seen online, because that's something that I do a lot, and that was a sort of secondary consequence of the whole sort of pandemic lockdown thing as well, that many of us started to transfer our activities to online, and found that was actually really you know, helpful thing to do. Not ideal, but helpful, and enabled us to keep working. It enabled people to get the help that they needed, which was fantastic. But then when you actually meet somebody for the first time that you know, but you feel you know them, but you don't really know them, that's just incredible. And I don't know, I have this sort of dream that one day, you know, we might actually be able to sort of form proper physical communities in physical locations where we can really make these things happen. But that's that's my dream, and that's and I'm the idea that we can call on Snowdrop to help with manifesting the dreams. I think that's a very powerful idea. That is kind of seems to me to embody the essence of Snowdrop as we've been discussing it just now. It's not a plant I've thought an awful lot about. Obviously, I'm very, very familiar with it from days of old. And my mum used to love snowdrops a lot, and by the way, she had Alzheimer's in the last few years of her life, so maybe there's a resonance there for me as well.
Right, interesting. And yeah, I hope to what you just said, you know, I feel like through the connections that we've made, maybe more through Zoom or the internet or whatever, with people that we haven't met, when we do finally meet them, we're meeting them in a different way to maybe how we might have met them before, because we've already met them in a different kind of space. And that's our, you know, our bottom line, or our baseline, I guess, of our connection with different people. And, you know, I've definitely had this thought more than once about, you know, what happens when finally we are all able to meet in in-person communities in a perhaps more safe and less toxic space, and, you know, we're able to be in groups for teaching or running retreats or ceremonies, all things which I've kind of basically had to knock on the head for the time being, because just perceive them to be a little too challenging to do right now. But for sure that's going to change, and I think that's really beautiful. Is that how do we then meet people that we've had long-standing connections, maybe even for a few years through the internet, right? And that's super exciting, and I'm really pleased that many people have been able to reach out to you and certainly make use of your vast herbal knowledge for healing purposes. And, you know, talking of which, let's just have a little look at a good old friend of both of us, Dandelion, for the last 5 or so minutes here. Because again, this guy is at the forefront of everything for me. You know, his energy is going to be super strong as we move into the latter part of this month and early March, but also his energy is of being present, being in the moment, so that we can perceive the veil falling. We can somewhat, take an eagle's perch perspective from things, but still be actively involved. But also, I think more importantly, he encourages that opening of that royal leonine heart, that sovereignty. But also, he's also an expert in DNA, and we've talked about this quite a lot. And again, for those of the audience who haven't checked this out, I did a whole piece with my partner Bella on the possibility of a quantum plant upgrade of our DNA working with dandelion, and I did the process myself. Very, very powerful. It took me out for 3 weeks, of which I've only just recently emerged, but boy, do I feel different. I feel lighter, I feel empowered, I feel inspired, and for a little while I lost that sense through the dark, hellishly introspective months of December and January. But with this full moon, I feel like a radiance sort of emanating from me again. And I love what this Sister Shirley said on the show the other day about shining our own light from our own hearts and enabling others to do the same and empowering others to shine their light, so that in the end, when we all do that, we become like the night sky but reflected down here on earth, which I think is beautiful. So what have you got to throw into the mix with Dandelion? I know we've talked about him a lot, but he seems to keep wanting to give more.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I mean, he's always there, and he seems to want to get into every formulation that I make these days, but that's been going on for a while. So many uses, and in herbal medicine, we mainly work with the root and the leaf of that plant, and they're perceived to have different slightly different effects. There's a similarity in some ways, but the leaf is more associated with diuresis and stimulating the kidney, but it's also a bitter tonic, so it helps with digestion. The root is much more about liver detoxification and getting the bowel moving actually as well. So there's a lot to do with elimination and detoxification and getting rid of stuff that doesn't serve you anymore, and lightening up, because I also give dandelion where people are a little bit depressed, and depression is a condition that I think devolves a lot onto the liver. The liver becomes stagnant and we become very melancholy in that situation, and dandelion comes along, clears it all out, and hey presto, we're back on top again, which I think is wonderful. And I've said before that I once wandered into a meadow which was absolutely carpeted with dandelion, and the uplifting effect was just stupendous. But I wanted to also bring out the fact that there's a connection with Leo and the solar kind of things. Very much a sort of sun-based plant, but it's also dandelion encompasses the moon as well. So I find it super interesting that we've got a dandelion moon almost at the moment with the Leo moon, and the seed head of dandelion is a ringer for the moon actually. And I find that sort of duality of dandelion also really, really fascinating. So I think he can go either to the sort of solar expansive or to the lunar, and again the idea of the seeds that are waiting to germinate, the seeds that are waiting to come to fruition. And of course he is the master of time as well, as we know, so the seasons and everything in its time, everything manifesting at the appropriate time.
Yeah, I mean, we often, particularly in the immersion that we did, we referred to dandelion as being a very solar, sort of masculine being, but of course he does have this more, or she maybe has this more feminine lunar side, which is perhaps a little less obvious, but some of the people doing the immersion did tune into that. And I just have to allude to a kind of a slightly, I don't know, Hollywood, well, not slightly, it was a very Hollywood movie that we watched here last night called Moonfall. Generally the acting was not great and the script was a little bit poor, but it really posits the idea. I mean, the moon drops out of orbit. It turns out that the moon is a construction by our ancestors. Very interesting idea. Also links in a lot to do with AI. So if you haven't seen that, do watch it. It's not super scary, but I definitely feel there's a lot of disclosure about the hollowness of the moon and what is the moon exactly. But for the purposes of this final few moments of this call, dandelion is very uplifting. And I feel like even though dandelion's about to come into his power again, and it's one of what we would call sort of the spring tonic plants, or cleansing plants, and I'm sure we're going to be looking more at some of our other favorites like ramsons or wild garlic in the upcoming podcast. These are the plants that we use. And the other one I like is cleavers. That's another one that tends to come up in March, and I'm sure we'll be looking at that. But this idea of the cleanse after the winter period is really important, because we do get a little sludgy. We do have stuff that collects in the liver. And if we want to really move forwards and become, more like the photonic light bodies that Pam's been talking a lot about, and again, our friend Horsetail comes in there, of becoming more silica based, being able to absorb or receive more light. Well, if we've got a lot of sludge down in the liver or other parts of our system, that's going to be a little tricky to take the light into the places where the energy is dense. And so again, our friend Dandelion, with all of his other skills, offers the possibility to release those things that no longer serve us, and also remind us of our place in duality, and that everything is a case of balance, but it's also already all perfect. So I feel like Dandelion is going to be very much a part of the continuation of the quantum plant pioneering work, because I feel like really in many ways he's the architect of it. And, we've done quite a few immersions and connected to quite a few plants already, and I'm sure there's going to be more coming soon. But I feel that Dandelion for me is the guy that's always, he's the guy that's overseeing it for me. He is really one of my major allies right now, and there isn't a day goes by where I don't ask his assistance or help for something. And so at the risk of banging the drum over and over again about this plant, I really advise everybody to get on board with El Dandolero and have him in your your crew, so to speak.
Aho, brother. Absolutely. I concur. I mean, from a herbalist point of view, you can't ignore this plant, and it's known about, he's known about in all the traditions as well. It's not just the Western herbal medicine tradition. A global superstar for sure.
Right, and I know that our friend Emily is keen to do another piece on Dandelion, perhaps with both of us at some point, because she's been investigating it more from a Chinese medicine perspective. So watch this space. Maybe we'll get to do a show with the three of us at some point. But look, as always, bro, it's been wonderful to catch up. I hope that we get back more into a regular routine with Wyrd like we had before all of this chaos kicked off over the last few months, because you do have a big fan club out there, and I'm glad that some of them are getting to meet you in person. In the intervening period, you've become a YouTube celebrity superstar, bro, and I know that many people out there have been missing the banter that we have on this show. And of course, we always try to take a neutral perspective on everything. We're just taking a slightly sideways look at how we see the world unfolding around us, and never is our intention to upset anybody, just to have a look at what's going on and just to give some alternative opinions, which hopefully resonate with many of you out there in some way. So just remind everybody, bro, where they can get hold of you if they do want to reach out for medicines.
My website, www.thenaturalcentre.com. Don't forget that centre is spelt the English way, not the American way. So that's centre with an R-E.
Yeah. And that's not a precursor for any accusations of being woke or divisive in any way. That's just
none at all.
how it's spelled in the land that Pete lives in. So anyway, look, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, bro, for a great catch up. It's been really nice to connect with you again. And for sure, I'm sure that we're going to be looking at some of the upcoming pieces in the coming weeks, because I've got a feeling that it's going to get a little interesting between now and the end of, certainly the end of March, I think, beginning of April. But 2023, I do think is going to be a year of cleanup and cleansing and realignment and birthing of new dreams and new visions. So today is full moon in Leo, everybody. Make the most of it. Get out there, shine your royal heart to all and sundry. Be in your integrity, be in your authenticity, and have fun. Have fun, and occasionally have a party too. That's also allowed apparently in UF. So I feel like we could all do with having a little bit of fun on the beach, right? So thank you, bro. Thank you, everybody, and we'll catch you all next time. Ciao for now.